because this is a remarkably powerful group of people. Because the fact that I am, first of all, standing in front of people I don't know and dancing, you gotta be kidding me. But thank you. I mean, I love Pharrell, and I love this song, and I love being happy. But I will tell you that happiness is never, ever my goal. Because as you all know, happiness comes and happiness goes. Because happiness, of course, is based on our external circumstances. You probably don't know it, but there are over 4,000 books on Amazon alone trying to teach us where to find happiness and how to get happiness and how to hang on to happiness. Well, a lot of these people just sort of want you to believe that it's choice. Just be happy. You know that, I think it was that old song, "Don't worry, be happy." Well, you know, it's not just mind over matter. You know, happiness is really easy when things are good. But, you know, that's not life. I mean, stuff happens. It's very difficult to feel happy when you lose a job, when you suffer illness, when someone dies. It's very difficult. Happiness is very, very fleeting. When you can't intention your way into happiness, or stuff happens despite your best intentions, for most people, it leads to a lot of confusion and a lot of feelings of, you know, anger or dissatisfaction or guilt because I must not have intentioned well enough, or I didn't pray in the right way. I didn't go to the right church. But that's partly why I never, ever recommend to anyone to seek happiness. I always talk about seeking joy. Because while happiness is a truly wonderful emotional state, joy is really a state of being. And I will tell you that just as happiness cannot be chosen, I don't think you can choose joy either, which is why I always talk about trust. Because you can't really choose to trust, but you can work your way to the point where you can choose to trust God's many promises. And I think it is this choice to trust those promises that ultimately leads to living the joy-filled life that I believe we are all meant to live. Now, I don't want you to think I always thought this way or always believed this, because before I died in 1999, I didn't really think about happiness or joy at all. I mean, I was kind of too busy to think much about it. And this is me. Go, so cute. I was a very typical kid of the Midwest in the 1950s. My parents took me to church. I was confirmed in the church. But it was the kind of thing back then, you know, you go on Sunday and then you go back to your real life. And then I went off to college and medical school. And like perhaps many of you, when I went off to college, I said, okay, great, I don't have to deal with that anymore. And I readily traded maybe my vague sense of faith or maybe hope that some of those promises were true for an absolute acceptance of science, the supremacy of the intellect. And really, I'm pretty sure was somewhat arrogant in that acceptance and really stepped away from faith traditions. And I have to tell you that, like many of you also, I never really thought about death. I mean, I was a surgeon, and I had dealt with death in my training and in my practice. But at that point in my life, I had known no one who died personally. I hadn't lost a grandparent, a parent, a sibling, a friend. And like most people, I never thought about death until I had to. I never thought about what the death process would be. I never thought about the fact that I would ever die. But of course, surprise, we're all going to die. And my own feeling is that you sort of have to prepare for that now. And it's better to prepare for those issues that you know are going to come before they come. And all of that changed in 1999. Oh, my kids, they snuck in there. Oh, there's a slide missing. Okay, well, all of that changed in 1999 when I was pinned at the base of this waterfall. And I was on a very remote river in South America. Circumstances were such that rather than going over the smaller chute, I was forced to go over the main part of the waterfall. And when I did, I rocketed down and the front end of my boat became pinned or stuck in the rocks and the underwater features. And I was immediately and completely submerged under 8 to 10 feet of water. And while I was there, I made a very active choice not to passively surrender and say, oh, okay, I'm going to die. Like, come on, God, get it together. But I made this very active choice to say, okay, your will be done. And that single choice changed my life, because the moment I asked that, I was immediately surrounded and had a very physical sensation of being held and comforted and reassured that everything was fine. My husband would be fine. These 4 little kids would be fine, regardless of whether I lived or died. And it was a remarkable time for me because I told you, I was no religious zealot. And I knew I was being held by Christ. And that was a little confusing for me, actually, because I grew up in this world where we do things and we get rewards. And I had certainly done nothing to earn that right to be filled with Christ's love and have it poured into my very being. And we went through a life review that was nothing that I personally could have ever imagined. The most painful, miserable, hurtful events of my life kind of started going across, sort of like swiping on an iPhone. Started going across, and Christ would just reach out and would be immediately reinserted into one particular event. But it was different. As I re-emerged or re-entered each event, I had an absolute and complete understanding of everyone, of me, of the people involved. I understood everything about our life stories, our backstories, all of our hurts and disappointments and struggles, everything that had brought each of us to that moment in time where either I hurt them, or they hurt me, or they hurt someone I loved. And it was a really profound experience, because what I discovered is that with that knowledge, I felt only incredible love and deep compassion for the other people involved and for myself. And, I have to tell you, it was a very profound experience for me, but it shouldn't be. I mean, we all have that experience where either we misjudge someone else or someone misjudges us. But with that understanding came incredible grace. And it wasn't a matter of forgiveness. It wasn't, in our culture, forgiveness is never complete, and it's always a 2-part sentence. I forgive you, but I don't ever want to see you again. I forgive you, but I still think you're a jerk. But what I experienced is that where God's love is present, there's no room for destructive emotion. It is all about love and this incredibly deep compassion. I was also, during that time, shown the beauty that came out of each and every one of those miserable experiences. And the further away the experience was, the better I was able to see the beauty that came out of it. And I was shown the effect of each one of those events. And again, these are the most hurtful, unpleasant, miserable events of my life. But when I saw the effect 25, 30, 35 times removed from the event itself, I felt nothing but gratitude, absolute gratitude for each and every one of those miserable events. And then eventually my body was kind of sucked over the front deck of the boat by the current. And I have to tell you that people always ask, were you afraid, panic, all that? No. I mean, I'm a spine surgeon. I'm not sure that I relish high-stress situations, but I'm certainly comfortable with them and used to them. So no, I didn't panic. I certainly tried to free the boat, free me from the boat, those sorts of things. And I'm a very pragmatic, analytical sort of person. And as this was happening, my little thought balloon off to the side was thinking, wow, this is really weird. Not what I expected. And I would do these little self-assessment exams. I would take a minute to say, okay, let's be reasonable here. I'm very good with time. I knew how much time was passing. I must have a little air pocket. Okay, I'm breathing. So I would take a minute and I'd think about it. I'd sort of feel myself. And I'd think, no, I'm not breathing. It's really just water. There was a shift in time and dimension so that I could be held by Christ. I could be going through these life reviews, having all these experiences, but simultaneously, I could still feel the weight of the water. I could feel the current. I could feel the plastic of my boat around my legs. I could feel my body coming over the front deck of the boat. And as you might imagine, you come over the front deck of the boat, and it works pretty well for your hips, not so well for your knees. And I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I know what breaking people's bones feels like. And as my knees were breaking, I was thinking, that's probably not so good. And I would question, okay, am I screaming? But I just don't know it. And I would take a minute, I'd step back and say, no, actually, I feel really good. I never had the experience of being conscious and then unconscious, or alive and then dead. I had this experience of being conscious and then more conscious, alive and then more alive. I felt expansive. And as my body came over the front deck of the boat, my spirit sort of peeled away from my body, and I rose up and out of the river. And I was immediately greeted by a group of, I don't know what, people, spirits, beings, I don't know what to call them. Those words mean different things to different people. But they were so absolutely overjoyed to love me and welcome me and greet me. And they were people who had known me and loved me as long as I have existed. And everyone always asks, okay, well, who were they? I already told you, at that point in my life, I had known no one personally who had died. And so these were not people I recognized, but I had an absolute knowledge that they were people who had been important in my life story. So maybe it was a grandparent who died before I was born. But they were clearly people, they were clearly my people. There were people who were there for me. And again, I said there's this shift of time and dimension, so I was with them and rejoicing. And at the same time, I could look back at the scene at the river. I could watch my body being pulled ashore. I recognized it as mine. And I have to tell you that I had a great life. I had no issues. I had a great job. I had a husband who loved me dearly, and I loved him. I, again, had these 4 little kids who I loved more than life itself. But I have to tell you, when I looked at my body and knew what it represented my life here, I knew I wasn't coming back, because I had an absolutely overwhelming sense of being home, of being where I really belong and where we all really belong. And I was overwhelmed. I mean, I could hardly wait to sleep in my own bed. You know, I was home. And so I sort of said, okay, thank you, goodbye. And they started taking me down this pathway to this kind of great dome structure of sorts that was the most beautiful thing that I personally could ever imagine. And what speaks beauty to me, what can bring me to tears, are colors and flowers, the intricacies of flowers and the aromas of flowers. That speaks beauty to me. And that is what I experienced. This pathway was not only woven together with fibers of love, but exploded with every color of the universe, and some that I've never seen on Earth. Every flower, hundreds and thousands of flowers and the aromas. And there was this weird, shift or experience. I could see all these colors and flowers all simultaneously, even though, you know, they didn't mix together to make brown or anything. They were just simultaneous. And I could not only see them, but I could hear them and feel them and understand them and be a part of them almost. And I will tell you that this part of my experience, I think actually speaks to the truth of these near-death or after-death experiences. Because you think about on Earth, you know, we all experience beauty differently. My husband will hear beautiful music. I'm pretty sure of it. And his dogs will probably be there because that's what really moves him. I live in Wyoming. I listen to country western music. I don't appreciate good music. So for me, beautiful music would not make me feel known or loved or home. And I absolutely believe that God speaks to each of us where we are. And I believe that we are each presented at the time of our death the experience that will make us feel fully known and loved. So for me, it was this pathway, and we kind of went down the pathway, and we'd get down, and these guys who were doing CPR were very dear friends of mine. And they're professionals, and they teach water rescue. This is not a fly-by-night kind of thing. And they were doing CPR, and one of the guys was young. He was only 18. He was kind of a very vulnerable sort of guy, and he kind of called to me, Mary, please come back and take a breath. And I would be overcome with compassion for him, and I would say, okay, I'll be right back. And I would walk down, I would lie down, take a breath, and immediately rejoin these, again, people, spirits, I don't know. We'd get a little bit further down the path, and he would start calling again, and I'd say, I'll be right back. And I would go back and take another breath. And this cycle went on 10 or 12 times. It was very interesting to talk to him afterward, because I was ready to kill him. Sort of for you that have kids, it's like, oh my gosh, no, a book, another book, a water, a whatever, just go to bed. I was saying, no, I'm done. I'm not coming back. But on his perspective, of course, he was saying I would take a breath, which to me, I'm a concrete thinking person. A breath means one. You take a breath, and then there would be nothing. So he was very frustrated because I didn't seem to be coming back. Eventually, I did get to the end of this pathway and was at this archway of sorts. And I was there for what felt like many, many hours. And while I was there, I had this experience of complete understanding. I didn't necessarily understand the nature of the universe, but I had an absolute understanding of the divine order of the universe, how it all works. And one of the things that I can't explain it, I don't have the language, but one of the things I understood very clearly is how it can be possible for there to be a God that actually knows each and every one of the billions of us on the planet, loves each and every one of us as though we're the only ones, and has a plan for each and every one of our lives that's one of hope. And for me, that had always been a little bit of a problem. You think about the people in this room, it would be really hard to know everyone. And it would be even more difficult to love everyone. So the idea that this was actually true and that there really is a God that is real and present here, now, in each one of our lives, that was kind of overwhelming for me. But I keep trying to get across this threshold because I knew that was the point of no return. And I told you I had no intention of coming back. And eventually, I was told it wasn't my time, that I had more work to do on earth, and that I had to go back to my body. And so I did. I was well-educated, confident, successful. I did what I think any reasonable person would do, and I said, I'm good. I can stay. I don't have to go back. Because keep in mind, I'd already been reassured that these kids would be fine. But, of course, I am a doctor. I don't know how many lawyers are here, but I got kicked out. I didn't have a good enough argument. But at that point in time, I was given information on some of the work I still had to do. And I was basically given this laundry list of work. There isn't a single thing on that list that was going to be easy. Every single thing on the list would challenge me in big and small ways. And certainly the most challenging thing on the list had to do with the coming and unexpected death of my oldest son, who was only 9 years old at the time. And when I asked why, obvious question, why my son? I was immediately returned to my life review in which I had been shown the truth in God's promise that beauty comes of all things, eventually. But I had been shown that again and again and again. And I was reminded that it is always a matter of trust. And with that then, I was taken back down this pathway and reunited with my body. And I have to tell you, I will never ever forget the expressions of the guys who were doing CPR. Because their first thought was surprise. At this point, I had been underwater without oxygen for 30 minutes before they brought my body to shore and before CPR started. And they're the first to say that the only reason they started CPR is because they couldn't imagine telling my husband that they hadn't at least tried. But they had absolutely no hope. So when I opened my eyes, they were in a state of shock. Now, the second emotion that showed in their face was, sort of comical. They were just going, oh my gosh, now what? What do we do? We were in the middle of nowhere. I live in Wyoming. I understand wilderness. But in the United States, in the wilderness, you can use your sat phone, cell phone, call search and rescue, and they will come and get you. I was in a very, very remote area of South America on a very, very inaccessible river. We didn't have cell phones, we didn't have sat phones, and even if we did, there was no one to call. There weren't medical services there, and even now, they're pretty limited. So they were trying to figure out what to do, and they looked up, and these two Chilean guys were just on the riverside. They hadn't come in boat, and there's no way to get there absent the boat, and they were just wearing clothes. They never said a word. They just walked over, picked my body up, and put it on top of a kayak. And one of them had a machete, so they and a couple of our friends started trying to get me up these hillsides, because this part of the river was almost like a canyon and very, very thickly covered in bamboo. So it was kind of thing going, up 2 steps, back 1, up 2, back 1. And the guys who resuscitated me were very clear that they didn't really have a plan. They thought maybe we'd get to a dirt road and then one of them would run and find a horse or a cow or a tractor or something and then come back and then, blah, blah, blah. So after a few hours, we emerged onto this dirt road. And exactly right there was an ambulance. The ambulance driver very calmly got out. And I don't know how many of you all are in healthcare, But the very first thing you do is you walk up and you say, hey, what's going on? I was a mess. I didn't look good. I mean, my legs were mangled. I just drowned. I did not look good. Anyone in their right mind would walk over and say, whoa, what do you got? What's going on? This little guy who these friends of mine later described as kind of wearing what a 5-year-old would imagine an ambulance driver should wear. It's like just off a little bit. This guy just kind of walked over calmly, slowly. And when one of my friends looked at him and said, what are you doing here? He just said, waiting. And we then drove a couple hours, went to a little medical clinic. My husband's an orthopedic surgeon also, put some splints on. We then started our journey back to the US because I had decided I was going to go home. And the friends of mine went back to the river, back to that whole area, wanted to find the ambulance driver, wanted to find these guys, and you know what I'm going to say, there were no such. And I will tell you that despite having, I mean, my knees were shattered, broken bones, torn ligaments. Despite that, I had absolutely no pain. For about 2 weeks, I sort of felt like I was kind of neither here nor there. And I had absolutely no pain. I had a couple of more out-of-body experiences where I believe I was back in heaven, God's world, whatever you want to call it. It was the same intensity of love, the same intensity of color, of reality. And during one of them, I was given more information about work yet to be done. And then after the second one, I knew I wouldn't be coming back. And after that second experience in heaven, kind of the veil, whatever you want to call it, sort of a pacified. And then I did start to have pain, a lot of pain. And I went through, I don't know, many, many operations. And, you know, I was in the hospital for a long time, and I went through many, many, many months of rehab before I could walk again. And I used that time to try to figure out what had happened to me. I mean, I was a scientist. I deal in data. I don't deal in anecdotal evidence. I want to understand what happened to me. And so I not only looked back at all my medical records and talked to everyone who had been at the river and the emergency room and all those things, but I need to figure out what had happened. I'd been without oxygen for 30 minutes, and I will tell you that after 10 minutes, statistically, your likelihood of survival is 0. When I was admitted to the hospital in the US, my oxygen levels were in the 40s. Not really compatible with survival and survival without brain damage. And so I really went back to the original studies and looked at the original data and explored, you know, all the obvious things that I now call excuses, but, you know, dreams, hallucinations, neurotransmitter, you know, DMT trips. I really looked at and came to understand the physiology of anoxia and drowning and dying and everything I could get my hands on. Because I have to tell you, at that point in time, I was desperate to find an alternative explanation for my experiences. Because I knew that if I could grasp onto anything, I'd be able to discount everything I'd been told. All the work I had yet to do, and most importantly, I would be able to discount everything I'd been told about the coming death of my oldest son. So you can imagine, I was pretty focused on trying to find some sort of explanation. But after many, many months of research, I realized that my experiences had fallen way outside the boundaries of medicine and way outside the boundaries of science. And I had to conclude that mine had been a true and spiritual experience. And then I had to figure out what that meant. I had to start thinking about what did it mean for my daily life. And I had to start answering the question of sort of, so what? I mean, I had this experience, and people always ask how I've been changed. Because, of course, experiences are really meaningless if they don't lead to some sort of transformation. And there's no question that the single most profound change for me has been this transition from a hope or faith that God's promises are true to an absolute trust. And that trust, I believe, is what has set me free to live a joy-filled life that, again, I believe we are each meant to live. And I'm going to explain a little bit. And these slides are a little goofy, but I think they'll make the point. First of all, if I trust that I am fully known, then I am free from all my past feelings of guilt or shame or anything else for the things I have done or not done in my past, including this morning, 2 hours ago. I mean, we make mistakes every day, but I am free from that. Because if I trust that I am fully known, then I know that God has nothing but love and a deep compassion for me. Similarly, I am absolutely free from any emotion of anger or bitterness or hurt that other people have caused. For the same reason, because I know that if I could know their story, I too would feel nothing but love and deep compassion for them. I mean, I'll give you a couple quick examples, and these are just kind of minor examples. There was a kid in my son's elementary school class that was just mean and cruel. And, he was sort of universally disliked and avoided. For me, I felt incredible compassion for that kid. And I tried to love him as best I could because I had been at his home when I watched his parents send him away from the dinner table to eat on the floor with his dogs. And it was clear to me that that had not been the first time. So I had a glimpse into his life story, which totally changed my understanding of him. And we all have those kinds of experiences. I went to a wedding a couple of years after my oldest son was killed, and everything was fine, but it was the first wedding I'd been to, and the parents came down the aisle and radiated joy. And I left because I knew I would just start sobbing. A week later, I was in the grocery store where you always hear things in a small town, and I heard this woman say to her friend about me, "Man, did you see that? That was so rude." I know that if she knew my life story and if she knew why I had left, she would feel nothing but compassion. And so I am free from all those feelings because I don't know everyone's story, but I know that they have a story. And I know that I would feel compassion if I could know their story. I am also absolutely free of fear, worry, anxiety about my future. Because I trust that God has a plan for me that is one of hope and for the world. I still make plans. I mean, I'm definitely a planner. Nothing much has changed there, but I hang on to my plans very, very loosely. Because I trust, that if my own plans for my future do not come to fruition, it's because God has something usually better in mind for me. And so I don't have anxiety. I don't have worry. I don't live in the future, and I don't live in the past. And I will tell you that I don't worry about death. Most people do. If you take a survey of people around the world, and especially in the US, people are terrified of public speaking and death. And they're kind of the same. I don't have that worry because I trust, and actually, of course, I would claim that I know that physical death is not the end, that consciousness does survive physical death. There is a life after death, a heaven, a God's world, whatever you want to call it. And I know that it's nothing more than going home. And I actually believe that the very reality of this home and the knowledge that we are going back actually brings incredible context and meaning and purpose to our time here on earth. And in this next slide, I'll sort of tell you what I mean by that. When you look at this slide, many of you will immediately see the white cup. And some of you will see the blue faces that provide the context and the purpose of the cup. For a moment, imagine that the white cup is our lifetime here on earth. And imagine that the blue background represents the people, the intentions, the love, and the reality of heaven or God's world, again, whatever you want to call it. Without that background and the purpose and the context it brings, our lives would truly be nothing but potential. And so, I'm not bound by my past. It doesn't define me. It doesn't define or dictate what my future is going to be. It doesn't limit me. It certainly doesn't determine what God thinks of me. And I'm also not concerned with my future. And what that does is it allows me to be fully present today, right now, in this very moment. Today, a lot of people have talked about mindfulness. And I think part of that, and I think the key to that, is this trust. Because your past needs to disappear. Your future anxiety needs to disappear. Because when you are fully present in the moment, it frees up the space, the openness, the bandwidth, whatever you want to say. It frees you to truly feel and hear and experience not only God's presence in the world, but God's love, and truly accept that love. And I believe trust, then, is what allows that, and with that trust brings joy. And that joy, I think, is truly based on this freedom. Freedom from the past, freedom from the future, and freedom to be fully present in this moment. And that's why I'm here today. That's why I speak to a lot of people, because I absolutely know that every person can make this transformation. I will tell you that my son was hit and killed by a car 10 years after this boating accident. And my experiences did not protect me from sadness at his loss, the grief of his loss. I love that kid. I still love him. I could cry today. I could cry tomorrow. But I can tell you that even on my most sad days, I still experience incredible joy, because that is the power of this transformation. And it does not require that you try to die. It doesn't require even that you've had a profound spiritual experience. You know, there are many profound spiritual experiences, not just near-death or after-death ones. You don't even have to do that. What I always like to do is challenge people to prove me wrong. Go home and look at your own lives. It's always looking backwards. It's looking backwards at all of the challenges you faced, all of the terrible things you thought were terrible at the time, and then looking ahead and seeing the beauty that came of it. And we all have those experiences. You know, we can all look back and say, you know, thank God I didn't marry that guy from college. That would have been a disaster. I mean, the further in the past something is, the more emotionally detached we are from it. And the more able we are to say, wow, yeah, that was really great. I'm so thankful. One of the things that happens in my medical practice is I'm a spine surgeon. I see people with devastating injuries. And because I know that their injury is part of the plan for their life, and I know that beauty will come of it, I mean, I don't say, oh man, it's so great that you're paralyzed. That's great. Good. But fundamentally, that really is how I believe. And so I'm able to spin it and work with them and help them see it as an opportunity, because I absolutely know that beauty will come of it. And because of that, I mean, I could give you story after story after story. The very first guy, I mean, I live in Wyoming. These are guys. These are not touchy-feely kind of guys. And there are many educated people in Wyoming, but there are many who never finished high school. They work in the oil fields or something. And this guy came in, 62 years old, bricklayer from the time he was 15, never finished school, didn't know anything else. Injured his back. His days as a bricklayer were over. In physical therapy, one of the therapists wanted him to do a watercolor painting. And he was going, I'm not going to do that. Are you kidding me? Like, what do you think I am? Wyoming's different. But I encourage them, because one thing I've discovered is that none of us ever change when things are good. We all change in response to challenges. And we can all look back at us from 15 years ago, and we can see that we are different today. And usually, it's in a better way. We have no idea how we're going to be in 15 years going forward. But we can intellectually accept that we will be different. And it will be because we have faced challenges. And so this guy came in and, he didn't want to do his watercolor painting. And I kind of pushed him. In fact, I really pushed him. Because I know that oftentimes part of that growth is uncovering hidden talent and hidden opportunities and hidden pleasures. And so he finally did one, mostly to have me leave him alone. And he was pretty good at it. And so then the therapist had him do another one and another one. And he ended up becoming a regionally well-known artist. And he made his own frames, and it was something he never imagined. And I had a letter from him every year. He died now, but every year he would send me a letter saying, I am so grateful for that accident, because he never, ever would have imagined this future for himself. And it was something he enjoyed tremendously. So, let's see, I got off on that tangent. So here's the thing. I know that each of you can look back at your life, and it almost always requires writing it down, because we all have very bad memories, and you start writing it down and you start seeing a pattern that is statistically impossible. And eventually, and for each of us, it requires a different level of data. I mean, I'm a data-driven person, and I like evidence, and I like a lot of it. But some people, need less. But you start collecting evidence, not from my life or anyone else's. It's got to be from your own life. But I know that each of you can collect enough evidence from your own life to begin this transformation to trust. And I also know that that transformation will take you places you never even imagined, and begin to change your life in amazing ways. Limitations will disappear. Your joy will increase. And I will tell you that happiness is a great thing. But joy contains happiness. Joy contains satisfaction. Joy contains love. So with that, I say, go prove me wrong. Thank you all for listening.